Lara stood at the edge of the battlefield, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon. The smoke rising from the ruins of her once beautiful city clung to the sky like a shroud of despair. Zarnath had been a thriving world once, its golden cities, gleaming under the twin suns. Now, the ruins spoke only of destruction, of a species teetering on the brink of extinction. Her people, the Zarnathians, were ancient and proud, warriors who had once held the galaxy in awe. But now their enemies were closing in. The great alien empire, known as the Galthar, had invaded, and their army was relentless. Lara had spent her life preparing to lead her people, but she hadn't expected to be thrust into leadership under these circumstances. She had expected to be crowned queen in times of peace, not during a war for survival. Lara's heart ached as she thought of her family. Her father, the king, was dead. Her mother, the queen, was lost to the chaos. And now, Lara was the last hope for her people. But she wasn't sure if she was ready for such a responsibility. The sound of footsteps behind her interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Commander Ivar, one of her most trusted soldiers, standing with a grim expression on his face. "Princess," he said, bowing his head, "we've received word from the humans. The Earth military is here to assist us." Lara's eyes narrowed. She had heard of humans before, wild, unpredictable creatures from a distant world. Her people had always seen them as little more than savages, a species barely capable of understanding the true meaning of honor. But now, they were their only allies. It was a bitter pill to swallow. "What are they offering?" she asked, her voice cool and controlled, though her heart was in turmoil. "They've sent their best soldiers," Ivar replied. "They'll arrive within the hour. But I must warn you, Princess, their methods are unconventional." Lara nodded, her mind racing. She didn't trust humans, but if they could help her people defeat the Galthar, then she would work with them. At least for now. "I will be ready to meet them," she said. "Prepare my ship." An hour later, Lara stood on the platform of the royal landing bay, watching the ships descend from the sky. Their metal frames gleamed in the fading sunlight, and the hum of their engines echoed through the silent air. As the ships touched down, Lara's heart beat a little faster. This was the moment she had been dreading. The hatch of the first ship opened, and a tall, broad figure stepped out. Lara's breath caught in her throat. The human was unlike anything she had expected. He was dressed in battle armor, but there was something about his presence that was disarming. He didn't look like a savage. He looked strong, confident. Lara's eyes locked onto his as he approached, his footsteps steady and sure. He was taller than most Zarnathians, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to pierce through her. His gaze held no fear, no hesitation. It was as if he had seen it all before, and nothing could shake him. "Princess Lara," the human said in a deep, gravelly voice, "I'm Captain Thomas Riley. We've come to help you." Lara's lips parted, but no words came out. She had been expecting a soldier, but not like this. His voice was calm, yet it carried a weight of authority that made her uneasy. There was something about him, something that stirred an unfamiliar feeling deep inside her. "I thank you for your help," Lara managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Captain Riley nodded, his expression unreadable. "We'll do everything we can, Princess. But we need to act quickly. The Galthar are closing in. We don't have much time." Lara's thoughts raced. This was it. The humans were here, and their help could mean the difference between life and death for her people. She had no choice but to trust them. "I understand," she said, her voice more steady now. "Follow me. I'll take you to the command center." As she turned to lead the way, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze on her. It was as if he were studying her, seeing something no one else had ever noticed. She hated it. But, at the same time, she couldn't deny that a part of her welcomed it. Later that night, after the meeting with her generals and the human soldiers, Lara found herself alone in the royal quarters, her mind spinning with questions. She had learned much about the humans from Captain Riley. They were a fierce, capable species, but also unpredictable. They fought with a rawness that the Zarnathians found strange, but effective. And yet, despite her growing respect for them, Lara couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Why had the humans come to help? Was it truly out of the goodness of their hearts, or did they have their own agenda? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. "Princess," Ivar's voice called from the other side, "the human captain requests an audience with you." Lara hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Send him in." The door slid open and Captain Riley stepped inside. He didn't bow, didn't offer the formalities that her people usually insisted upon. Instead, he simply stood there, watching her with those intense eyes. "I thought you might want to know." "The plan for tomorrow," he said, his voice low. "The Galthar are planning to launch a full-scale assault at dawn. We'll need to coordinate our forces." Lara nodded, her mind quickly shifting to the tactical side of things. But despite the urgency of the situation, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. She had been taught all her life to be cautious, to distrust the unknown. But this human, this Captain Riley, was something different. His presence was overwhelming, and Lara found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. "Of course," she said, her voice steady. "We'll do everything we can to stop them." Captain Riley stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've seen the strength in your people, Princess. But I need to know, can I count on you? Can I count on you to fight alongside us no matter what?" Lara's breath caught in her throat. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her chest tighten. She had never been asked such a question before, not by anyone, not even by her own people. I will fight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will do whatever it takes to protect my people." Captain Riley's expression softened, just for a moment. It was as if he understood something deeper than words could express. But then, his gaze turned serious again. "We'll need to act fast," he said. "We don't have much time." Lara nodded. But as he turned to leave, she found herself standing, frozen, staring at his back. Something about the way he carried himself, the quiet strength in his every movement, stirred something inside her. She had never felt this way before. She had never felt the need for anyone, not in the way she felt for him. But she couldn't let herself dwell on it. She had a planet to save, and emotions had no place in this war. Still, as the door slid shut, behind him, Lara couldn't help but whisper to herself, "Will you be the first to hold me, human?" The days following the arrival of Captain Riley and the human soldiers were filled with tension. The threat of the Galthar loomed larger than ever, casting a dark shadow over the war-torn planet. Lara's role as the last hope of her people had never felt so heavy. But in the midst of the chaos, one thing kept pulling her thoughts away from the battlefield: Captain Thomas Riley. At first she told herself it was nothing. It was the stress of the war, the pressure of leading her people in their darkest hour. But every time their eyes met, her heart would race in a way that made no sense. She had no time for such distractions. She was a princess, a warrior, and a leader. She had her duty. But Captain Riley was different. He wasn't like the other soldiers. He didn't look at her with pity or see her as some fragile figurehead. He saw her for who she was, strong, capable, determined. And somehow, in the quiet moments when they were alone together, she saw something in him that made her feel alive. It was something she couldn't quite put into words. That night, After another brutal round of battles against the Galthar, Lara found herself in her quarters, staring out at the ruined city below. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the sky a dark blanket over the world. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, tactics, strategies, her people's survival. But beneath it all, there was the soft pull of something else. She had been restless all evening, her thoughts circling around the same question. Why had the human soldiers come? They weren't part of her people's alliances. Humans had no reason to help the Zarnathians. They were here because the humans wanted something from them, weren't they? But then why had Captain Riley looked at her the way he had, with that strange intensity? He didn't seem like a soldier looking for glory. He seemed like a man with something more, something she didn't understand. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. "Princess?" Ivar's voice came from the other side. "Captain Riley requests an audience with you." Lara paused. Captain Riley, again. She hadn't expected him to come to her directly, but she thought perhaps now was the time to put her questions to rest. She was no fool. If he wanted something, she would find out what it was. "Send him in," she called out, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. The door slid open, and Captain Riley stepped in, his figure tall and imposing in his battle armor. His eyes, however, were softer tonight, and there was a quiet urgency in his expression that Lara hadn't seen before. "Princess Lara," he said, his voice deep but tinged with concern. "I need to speak with you about the strategy for tomorrow. The Galthar are preparing to attack from the south, and we need to strengthen our defenses." Lara nodded, ready to shift into tactical mode, but there was something in his presence that made it hard to focus. She couldn't help it. Her attention kept drifting back to him, to the way he stood there so steady and certain, as though he had no fear. "Of course," she replied, trying to shake off the strange feeling. "We'll need to bolster the southern defenses. I'll send word to the generals. We can't afford to let them break through." Captain Riley nodded, then took a step closer, his voice lowering slightly. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your people's need to survive. I understand that this is more than just a battle for you. It's your home, your people." Lara's heart fluttered in her chest. She hadn't expected him to understand so clearly. No one ever really did. Her people, the Zarnathians, had always been proud, but their pride had come at the cost of their survival. And now, with everything hanging by a thread, she was torn between the past and the future. "You're right," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "This is my home, and I can't let it fall. But I don't know how much longer we can hold out." For a moment, there was a silence between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Captain Riley's gaze softened, and something in the air seemed to shift. He stepped even closer, so close that Lara could feel the heat radiating off of him. She took a sharp breath, her senses heightened. His presence was overwhelming in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I can see the weight on you, Princess," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "But you're not alone in this. You don't have to carry this burden alone. Let me help you." His words, gentle and sincere, made her chest tighten. For the first time since she had taken on this role, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable. She had always been the strong one, the one who had to lead her people through every trial. But now, with the weight of their survival pressing down on her, she realized how much she needed someone by her side. Lara's heart thudded in her chest as she looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. There was something in his expression, something unspoken, a softness that contrasted with the hard edges of the soldier before her. In that moment, something deep inside her shifted. Before she could stop herself, she whispered, "I've never felt like this before. I don't know what to do." Captain Riley reached out slowly. his fingers brushing against her arm. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. She stiffened but didn't pull away. His touch was different from anything she had ever known. It wasn't forceful, but gentle, comforting even. It felt like home. "You don't have to know everything," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. "You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Lara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She could feel her heart racing, could feel the pull between them that she had been trying to deny. She had always been taught to stay in control, to never let her emotions get the better of her. But standing there with Captain Riley, she felt something breaking inside her. In a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Will you be the first to hold me, human?" Her words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. The moment felt surreal, and Lara immediately regretted speaking them. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but the question had slipped out before she could stop it. Captain Riley's eyes softened even more, his grip on her arm tightening slightly as if reassuring her. He didn't say anything at first, but the warmth in his gaze told Lara everything she needed to know. Slowly, carefully, he closed the distance between them. For the first time in her life, Lara allowed herself to surrender to the moment. She had been so focused on survival, on leading her people, that she had never allowed herself to feel something like this. But here, now, with the world falling apart around them, there was something undeniably powerful in the connection between them. "I will," Captain Riley said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "And I'll be here with you, no matter what happens." Lara's heart thudded in her chest as he wrapped his arms around her. It was the first time she had ever been held, like this, truly held, in a way that made her feel safe. His presence was grounding, like a rock in the storm of war. She had always believed that her people had to face everything alone, but for the first time, she felt the warmth of another, and it felt right. As they stood there holding each other in the quiet of the ruined palace, Lara realized that, for the first time in her life, she didn't have to face the future alone. And in that moment, she knew she wasn't just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for a future with him. The day after Captain Riley held her, Lara felt like something inside her had shifted. It was as if the world had changed, but only she could see it. The walls of the royal palace, once imposing and cold, now seemed softer, more fragile. The weight of the war was still there, looming over her every step, but for the first time in days, it felt a little more bearable. She hadn't expected to find comfort in a human, least of all in Captain Thomas Riley. Yet there it was, that strange sense of warmth whenever he was near. It confused her. Her people, the Zarnathians, had always taught her to keep her distance from humans. They were unpredictable, wild, and most importantly, they were the enemy. But Thomas didn't feel like the enemy. He felt like something else. Lara shook her head as she stood before the war table in the command center, her fingers brushing over the holographic map of the battlefield. She needed to focus. There was no time for distractions, no time for these confusing feelings. The Galthar were growing stronger by the day, and her people needed her to lead them. They couldn't afford to lose hope now. "Princess," a voice called from behind her. It was Ivar, her most trusted general. "Captain Riley requests to speak with you again." Lara sighed inwardly. She didn't know why, but every time she heard that name, her heart skipped a beat. She had to stop letting her emotions get in the way of her duty. The future of her people depended on it. "Send him in," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. The door slid open, and Captain Riley stepped in, looking every bit the soldier. His armor was slightly scuffed from the battles they had fought together, but he carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had first drawn Lara to him. "Princess," he greeted her, his voice calm but urgent. "We need to talk about the next move." The Galthar are massing their forces. We can't wait any longer. Lara nodded, her gaze fixed on the map. I know. We'll need to move fast if we're going to stop them. Thomas stepped closer, his eyes scanning the map before meeting hers. I've seen the way your people fight. You're not like any enemy I've faced before. You fight with honor, with heart. But that's not enough anymore. You need more than just heart if you're going to win this war. Lara looked up at him, her brow furrowing. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we join forces. Fully, he said, his voice growing more serious. The Galthar are powerful, but they're not invincible. We can take them down, but we need to fight as one. The idea was appealing. It made sense. But something about it unsettled Lara. For centuries, her people had fought alone. The idea of relying on humans, people she had been taught to fear and distrust, was difficult to accept. Yet, as she looked at Captain Riley, she saw the determination in his eyes. He wasn't just asking for an alliance, he was asking her to trust him. You want us to fight together? Lara said slowly. As equals? Yes, Thomas replied. No more divisions, no more barriers between our people. We fight for the same cause now. We fight for survival. Lara stood still for a moment, her mind racing. The war had torn her world apart, but maybe, just maybe, this was the only way forward. To fight together, side by side with humans, the way her ancestors had never imagined. It wasn't just about saving her people anymore, it was about finding something bigger than war. She looked into his eyes again. The connection between them was undeniable. Despite everything, despite their differences, she felt something stir deep inside her. She had never trusted anyone this much before, but she had to trust him, for her people, for herself. All right, she said, her voice steady. We fight together. Thomas's face softened, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Good. We'll make sure your people know they're not alone. Lara felt a sense of relief wash over her. The weight that had been crushing her chest seemed a little lighter now. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different. Something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparations. The humans and Zarnathians worked together like never before, coordinating strategies, fortifying positions, and preparing for the final battle. It was a grueling time, but Lara found herself growing closer to Thomas with each passing day. They spent long hours together, discussing tactics, overseeing training exercises, and sharing stories of their worlds. Lara had always been focused on her duty, but now, with Thomas by her side, she found herself opening up in ways she never had before. He wasn't just a soldier to her. He was becoming something more. He was a friend, a confidant, and perhaps something deeper. One evening, after a long day of planning, Lara found herself standing on the balcony of the royal palace. Staring out at the darkened landscape below, the stars above seemed distant, unreachable. But it was the only beauty left in the world. The rest had been destroyed by the war. You know? A voice broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Thomas approaching. I've always wondered what it would be like to see a sky like this. Where I come from, the city lights drown out the stars. Lara smiled softly, stepping aside to let him join her at the railing. I used to come here as a child, she said, her voice almost wistful. Before the war, my mother would bring me up here and we'd look at the stars together. She always said they were a reminder that no matter how dark things got, there was always light somewhere. Thomas looked up at the stars, his expression thoughtful. Your mother was wise. Lara nodded, her gaze fixed on the heavens. She was. She used to say that we were meant for something greater than just war, that we were supposed to bring peace to the galaxy. A quiet silence fell between them. And for a moment, Lara allowed herself to simply be with him. No talk of battles, no strategies, just the quiet presence of the human soldier beside her. It was in moments like this that she realized just how much he had come to mean to her. "You know," Thomas said softly, breaking the silence, "I never thought I'd be here, helping save a world I didn't even know existed. But now that I'm here, I wouldn't trade it for anything, and I wouldn't trade you either." Lara turned to face him, her heart racing in her chest. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the same sincerity that had first drawn her to him. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Before she could say anything, Thomas stepped forward, closing the space between them. His hand reached out, gently cupping her cheek. Lara's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering in her chest. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, and yet the moment she had been waiting for. Thomas didn't speak. He didn't need to. He leaned in slowly, his lips brushing softly against hers. It was a kiss unlike any other. It wasn't born of lust or passion. It was a kiss of understanding, of shared purpose, of something deeper. Lara closed her eyes, letting herself surrender to the moment. The war, the death, the destruction, it all seemed distant now. In this moment, there was only her and Thomas. And for the first time, Lara allowed herself to feel something other than fear and duty. She felt peace. When they finally pulled away, both of them were breathing heavily, their eyes locked in a quiet understanding. Lara smiled softly, her heart full in a way she had never known before. "I never thought I'd be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I'm glad I am." Thomas smiled back, his hand still resting on her cheek. "Me too." And in that moment, as they stood there together under the stars, Lara realized that the war was far from over. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. The morning of the final battle arrived too quickly for Lara's liking. The night before, she had stood on the balcony with Thomas, sharing a quiet moment under the stars. But today, everything was different. The world had changed. The air felt heavier, as if the very sky knew that this would be the day that would decide the future of her people. Lara stood in the command center, looking at the large holographic map that displayed the battlefield. The Galthar forces were massing at the southern border, and her people were positioned along the key defense lines. It was their last stand. She couldn't afford to fail. Her generals moved around her, speaking in urgent tones about their plans for the day. But Lara could barely focus. Her mind kept returning to the quiet moments she had spent with Thomas the night before. She could still feel the warmth of his touch on her cheek, the softness of his lips against hers. The kiss had been everything and nothing at the same time. It had been a promise, a connection between them that neither of them had expected, but both had needed. Yet in the back of her mind, doubt lingered. She had never let herself feel this way before, especially not during a war. Emotions were dangerous. They clouded judgment, weakened resolve. Lara had always prided herself on being the strong one, the one who never let feelings get in the way of duty. But now, with everything on the line, she wasn't sure what would happen if she let her emotions guide her. "Princess," Ivar's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. "The Galthar are preparing to attack. We need your orders." Lara turned to face her general, forcing herself to focus. There was no time for hesitation, no time for doubts. Her people were depending on her, and she wouldn't let them down. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "We hold the line. We fight with everything we have. This is our home, and we will protect it." Ivar nodded and turned to carry out her orders, but Lara remained rooted to the spot. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. Today was not just a battle for her planet's survival, it was a battle for her heart. She wasn't sure she could keep it all together. As the hours passed, Lara stood at the front lines, watching as the battle unfolded before her eyes. The Galthar were relentless, their dark ships descending from the sky like vultures, ready to feast on the last remnants of her world. Their forces were enormous, far greater than anything the Zarnathians had ever faced. But Lara's people fought with a courage that surprised even the humans. Captain Riley was at her side, just as he had promised. Together they directed their forces, issuing commands, organizing retreats, and encouraging their soldiers to keep fighting. Lara couldn't help but admire Thomas's leadership. He was everything she had imagined a soldier to be: brave, strategic, and calm under pressure. But there was more to him than that. He cared for the people around him. He was selfless. And when he looked at her, there was a depth to his gaze that made her heart ache. "You're doing well," Thomas said to her, his voice steady even as explosions rang out in the distance. "Your people are strong, Princess." Lara turned to him, her heart swelling with pride. "It's not just me. We're all in this together." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know, and I think we might just have a chance to win this." But as the battle raged on, Lara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was an unease in the air, a sense that the Galthar were holding something back, waiting for the right moment to strike. She glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds had gathered. It felt like the calm before the storm. "We need to hold them off for a few more hours," Lara said, her voice firm. "Once the reinforcements arrive, we'll have the advantage." But even as she spoke, a terrifying sound filled the air, a deep, thunderous roar that shook the ground beneath their feet. Lara's heart skipped a beat as she looked to the sky. From the distance, a massive ship emerged from the clouds, larger than anything she had ever seen. It was the Galthar's flagship. It was massive, its sleek black surface reflecting the light of the twin suns. It hovered ominously above the battlefield, its cannons aimed directly at the Zarnathian forces. "Brace yourselves," Ivar shouted, his voice cracking through the chaos. "We need to take it down or we're done for!" Lara's mind raced. She had prepared for a ground assault, but nothing had prepared her for this. The Galthar had brought out their most powerful weapon. It was a last-ditch effort, a desperate play to end the war in their favor. She turned to Thomas. "We need to destroy that ship, or we'll lose everything." "I know," he replied, his face hardening. "I have a plan, but we'll need to move fast." Lara nodded. "Do whatever it takes." For the next few hours, Lara and Thomas worked together to lead a small team of soldiers into the heart of the Galthar forces. They used every tactic they had learned, every trick they could think of, to infiltrate the enemy's defenses. The battlefield was a blur of gunfire, explosions, and the screams of battle. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground shook with each new blast. As they neared the Galthar flagship, Lara could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. This was the moment that would decide everything: her people's future, her relationship with Thomas, everything. She had no idea what would happen after this, but she knew that whatever it was, they had to succeed. "We're almost there," Thomas said, his voice tight with tension. "Once we get close enough, we'll disable the flagship's engines. That should make it vulnerable to attack." Lara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt so alive, so desperate, so determined. She was not just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for her future, for the chance to build something better with Thomas. Just then, a blast shook the ground beneath them, sending Lara tumbling to the floor. She looked up to see one of her soldiers, one of her best, falling to the ground, blood pouring from his side. Without thinking, Lara rushed to his side, her heart in her throat. "Stay with me," she whispered, pressing her hands to his wound. But it was no use. His life slipped away in her arms, and Lara felt a deep, aching loss. "We can't stop now," Thomas said, his voice firm as he pulled her to her feet. "We have to finish this." With a last, lingering look at the fallen soldier, Lara nodded. "For him! For all of us!" The final assault was fierce and chaotic, but Lara and Thomas managed to disable the flagship's engines just as they had planned. The Galthar flagship was now vulnerable, and the human forces launched a full-scale attack. Lara watched in awe as the Galthar ship exploded in a burst of light, its massive frame crumbling into pieces as it fell from the sky. The Galthar forces were in disarray, and the remaining soldiers quickly surrendered. As the smoke cleared, Lara looked over at Thomas, her heart racing. The battle was won. The Galthar had been defeated. But at what cost? Her people had lost so much, and so had the humans. The war had taken its toll on everyone. Thomas approached her, his face bruised but alive. "We did it," he said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and relief. Lara nodded, but there was no joy in her expression. The war had ended, but the scars it left behind would last forever. She had fought for her people, but in the end, it had been more than just a battle for survival. It had been a battle for her soul. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Thank you." Thomas reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We did this together." And as they stood on the battlefield, the sounds of victory ringing in the air, Lara realized that while the war was over, the real journey had just begun. The battle was over. The war that had raged for so long, the conflict that had torn apart her world and her people, had come to an end. Lara stood among the ruins, the remnants of the Galthar forces scattered across the landscape. The air was thick with smoke. The once beautiful city of Zarnath now nothing more than a collection of broken buildings and shattered dreams. Yet amidst the destruction, there was a sense of quiet triumph. The Galthar had been defeated, their flagship destroyed, their forces scattered. The fight had been long and hard, and many lives had been lost, on both sides. But now, for the first time in years, Lara could breathe. The immediate threat had passed. She looked around at the people who had fought beside her, her people and the humans, standing together, united in their victory. The ground beneath their feet was still stained with the marks of battle, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes. The war was over, and now it was time to rebuild. Lara's thoughts were interrupted as a voice called her name. She turned to see Captain Thomas Riley approaching, his face tired but resolute. He had been by her side through every step of the war, and now, in the aftermath, he was still there. He was more than just an ally, more than just a soldier. He had become something much more. "Princess Lara," Thomas said, his voice low but steady. "We did it." Lara nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of what they had accomplished and what they had lost. "We did. But it came at a great cost." Thomas stepped closer, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "Yes, it did. But we won. And now, we have the chance to make something better. Together." Lara's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected to hear those words from him, not in the midst of war. But now, with the dust of battle settling around them, she could see it. She could see the possibility of a future. A future with Thomas, with her people, with humanity. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about rebuilding, about creating something new from the ashes of destruction. But even as hope blossomed in her chest, doubt lingered. The cost of victory had been high, and there was still so much to do. Lara knew that rebuilding her world would not be easy. The scars of war would remain, and it would take years, maybe even decades, to heal. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. She had Thomas by her side. "I don't know where to begin," Lara said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "So much has been lost. So many lives." Thomas placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "We begin by moving forward, together. We rebuild what we can, and we honor those we've lost by making sure their sacrifices weren't in vain." Lara looked up at him, her heart full of gratitude. "I don't know if I can do this without you." "You don't have to," he replied softly. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lara allowed herself to feel a sense of peace. She had spent so many years carrying the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders, but now for the first time she wasn't alone. She had Thomas, she had her people, and together they could rebuild. Days passed, and the world began to change. The human forces had agreed to help with the reconstruction of Zarnath, bringing with them their technology, their resources, and their expertise. It was a slow process, but it was progress. The Zarnathians worked alongside them, forging new alliances, learning from one another, and building a future together. Lara found herself working closely with Thomas in the days that followed. They attended meetings, discussed plans, and coordinated efforts to rebuild their cities and their people. There were still many obstacles to overcome, and the scars of the war ran deep. But for the first time, there was a sense of hope. Hope that things could get better. One evening, after a long day of work, Lara found herself standing once again on the balcony of the royal palace. The sky was clear, the stars shining brightly above. It was a peaceful night, one that felt almost surreal after the chaos of the past months. The world had been changed forever, but there was a quiet beauty in the stillness. Thomas joined her, his footsteps soft on the stone floor. He didn't say anything at first, but simply stood beside her, looking out at the city below. They had been through so much together, and now, in this quiet moment, there was no need for words. Lara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now that the war is over, what do we do?" Thomas smiled, softly, his eyes warm with understanding. "Now we live, we rebuild, and we find out what kind of future we want to create." Lara nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many challenges ahead, so many wounds that needed to heal, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the future might hold. She had a purpose, she had hope, and she had someone by her side who would help her face whatever came next. "I never thought I'd be here," Lara said, her voice almost a whisper. "After everything that's happened, I never thought we'd make it." "We did," Thomas replied softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "We made it together." Lara's heart ached with the truth of his words. She had spent so long fighting, so long struggling to survive, that she had never stopped to consider what came after. But now, with the war behind them, she realized that this was just the beginning of something new, something better. "I don't know what the future holds," Lara said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I know I want to face it with you." Thomas's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "And I'll be there, always." The promise, in his words, was all that Lara needed. The future was uncertain, but with Thomas by her side, she knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they would rebuild. Together they would create a future that honored the past while embracing the hope of tomorrow. The stars above them seemed to shine a little brighter in that moment, as if the universe itself was watching over them, guiding them toward the new beginning that awaited. And as they stood there, hand in hand, looking out at the world they had fought to save, Lara knew one thing for certain. No matter what came next, she was no longer facing it alone. Weeks passed, and the rebuilding continued. The once broken cities began to rise again, their ruins replaced with new structures built from the unity of two worlds. The humans and Zarnathians worked together, side by side, each day bringing them closer to the future they had fought for. Lara and Thomas found themselves growing, closer as well, their bond strengthening with every shared moment, every challenge they faced together. The war was behind them, but the journey ahead was just beginning. There were still many questions to answer, many choices to make. But one thing was clear. Lara was no longer the lonely princess she had once been. She was a leader, a partner, and a woman who had found a future worth fighting for. And as she looked at Thomas, her heart filled with love and gratitude. Together, they had faced the impossible. Together, they had won. And together, they would build the future they had always dreamed of. The stars above still shone brightly, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always light. And for the first time in her life, Lara knew that light would guide them through the challenges, through the pain, and into the new world they would create together.